You're not family. You're just the person who sends the cash. My brother sneered across the Thanksgiving table. My aunt chimed in, laughing. And he works in tech. They don't even socialize, just type on computers. I stayed quiet. Then I quietly canceled the $9,500 transfer that was supposed to cover dinner, gifts, and electricity. The power went off right in the middle of carving the ham. I, 28M, stared at my phone screen as the power flickered off in my childhood home, plunging the Thanksgiving dinner into darkness. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by my aunt's confused muttering about the electricity bill. Let me back up. I'd been sending money home for 3 years now, ever since landing my software engineering job at a Fortune 500 company. $9,500 every few months, covering utilities, groceries, repairs, and whatever crisis my family manufactured next. My brother had dropped out of college twice and bounced between minimum wage jobs. My aunt lived in the basement rent-free after her divorce. My parents, both on disability, treated my income like their personal ATM. The arrangement started innocently enough. Dad had called about a medical bill, and I'd helped out. Then it was the car breaking down, then the roof needing repairs. Before I knew it, I was essentially funding their entire lifestyle while living in a studio apartment, eating ramen, and driving a 10-year-old Honda. But I did it because family mattered, right? The insults had been building all evening. My brother started by mocking my job, saying I probably just played video games all day and called it work. My aunt joined in, making jokes about how tech people were antisocial weirdos who couldn't function in the real world. My cousin chimed in about how I never visited enough, conveniently forgetting I lived 8 hours away and worked 60-hour weeks. The breaking point came when my brother looked me dead in the eye and declared I wasn't really family, just the person who sent cash. My aunt burst into laughter, adding that people like me didn't even socialize, just typed on computers all day like robots. I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, watching my family tear me apart while eating food I'd paid for, in a house where I'd covered the mortgage payment last month. The ham they were carving? I'd transferred money for that too, along with all the sides, the wine, even the fancy tablecloth my mom had insisted on buying. That's when I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The scheduled transfer for $9,500 was set to process at midnight, money earmarked for their electric bill, Christmas gifts, and groceries for the next 2 months. My finger hovered over the cancel button. My brother was still talking, explaining to my cousin how I probably made all my money by accident and didn't deserve any respect. My aunt nodded along, suggesting that tech jobs weren't real work anyway. I canceled the transfer. Then I canceled the automatic payment I'd set up for their electric bill. The power company had already sent 2 disconnect notices that I'd quietly handled by paying the balance in full. Without my intervention, they had exactly 4 hours before the power would be shut off for non-payment. I excused myself to use the bathroom and called the utility company from the hallway. I explained that I was no longer authorized to make payments on the account and requested they proceed with the scheduled disconnection. The customer service representative confirmed the power would be cut at exactly 8 p.m. I returned to the table and sat quietly, checking my watch. 7:58. My brother was in the middle of explaining to everyone how I probably couldn't even change a tire or fix anything useful when the lights went out. The electric carving knife my dad was using died mid-slice through the ham. The football game on TV cut to black. The heater stopped humming. The confusion was immediate. My mom asked what happened. My dad fumbled for his phone's flashlight. My aunt wondered aloud if a transformer had blown. My brother suggested it was probably just a temporary outage. I knew better. My phone buzzed with a text from the power company confirming the disconnection due to non-payment. I deleted it and continued eating my dinner in the dark, using my phone's flashlight like everyone else. My dad announced he'd call the electric company in the morning to sort things out. I almost laughed. He had no idea that their account was 3 months behind and that I'd been the only thing standing between them in this exact scenario. The evening deteriorated quickly. Without power, the house grew cold. The food started getting unappetizing without proper lighting. My cousin complained about not being able to charge her phone. My brother grumbled about missing the rest of the game. But the real panic set in the next morning. Update 1. I drove back to my apartment Friday night, leaving my family to figure out their power situation. I told them I had to work early Monday, which was true, but I also wanted to be far away when reality hit. The call started Saturday afternoon. First my mom, asking if I could help with the electric bill since they discovered it was higher than expected. I told her I was having my own financial difficulties and couldn't help right now. She sounded confused but didn't press. Then my dad called Sunday evening. The power company had informed them that the account was severely past due and would require a payment of over $2,000 to restore service. He asked if I could loan them the money, promising to pay me back. I explained that my recent car repairs had wiped out my savings, and I simply didn't have that kind of cash available. The lie came easily. My savings account had over $40,000. My brother called Monday morning, his tone noticeably different from Thursday night. He asked if there was any way I could help with a smaller amount, maybe just enough to get the power back on. He mentioned that my aunt was talking about moving out if the situation didn't improve soon, and my parents were considering selling the house. I told him I understood how stressful the situation must be, but I was barely making ends meet myself. I suggested he might want to pick up extra shifts at work or maybe look into assistance programs. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 3 years, I'd been their assistance program. By Wednesday, my aunt had indeed moved out, staying with a friend across town. My parents were staying at a motel, running up credit card debt they couldn't afford. My brother was crashing on various couches, finally experiencing the instability he'd mocked me for trying to prevent. My cousin called Thursday, crying. She asked if I knew what was happening with the family and whether I could do anything to help. I told her I'd heard about their difficulties but didn't have the resources to solve everyone's problems. She mentioned that my brother had said some awful things about me at Thanksgiving, and she was sorry she'd laughed along. Too little, too late. Update 2. 3 weeks later, my parents called with an update. They'd managed to scrape together enough money to get the power restored, but it had required borrowing from multiple sources and would take them months to pay back. My dad's voice was strained as he explained how difficult things had been. He also mentioned that my brother had been asking about me, wondering if I was still upset about Thanksgiving. Apparently, my brother had started to realize that my absence coincided with their financial crisis, though he hadn't quite connected the dots. I told my dad I hoped things would improve for them and that I'd been thinking about the family a lot. This was true, though not in the way he probably imagined. My aunt had moved back in, but the dynamic had shifted. Without my financial safety net, everyone was forced to contribute. My brother had picked up a second job. My aunt was paying actual rent. My parents had applied for every assistance program available. For the first time in years, they were functioning like adults instead of dependents. The real test came at Christmas. My mom called in early December, tentatively asking about my holiday plans. She mentioned that they were planning a smaller celebration this year due to their recent financial difficulties. She didn't ask for money directly, but the implication was clear. I told her I'd been invited to spend Christmas with friends from work, another lie, but a necessary one. I actually spent the holiday alone in my apartment, ordering Chinese food and watching movies. It was the most peaceful Christmas I'd had in years. My brother texted me on New Year's Eve. He said he'd been thinking about what he'd said at Thanksgiving and wanted to apologize. He admitted that he'd been taking my help for granted and hadn't realized how much I'd been doing for the family. He asked if we could talk sometime. I read the message several times before responding. I told him I appreciated the apology and that maybe we could catch up soon. I didn't commit to anything specific. Update 3. 6 months later, my family had stabilized in their new reality. My brother had been promoted to assistant manager at his retail job and was talking about going back to school part-time. My aunt had found steady work and was saving money to get her own place. My parents had downsized to a smaller house they could actually afford. The most surprising change was in how they talked about money. My mom mentioned during one of our brief phone calls that they'd started budgeting carefully and had even managed to save a small emergency fund. My dad had taken a part-time consulting job that brought in extra income. They'd learned to live within their means because they no longer had a choice. I'd also made changes. The money I'd previously sent home was now going toward my own future. I'd maxed out my retirement contributions, started investing, and even put a down payment on a small house in a nice neighborhood. For the first time since college, I was building wealth instead of just transferring it. The guilt had faded gradually. Initially, I'd felt terrible watching my family struggle. But as months passed and I saw them becoming more self-sufficient, I realized I'd been enabling their dysfunction rather than helping them. My brother called me in late spring, his voice different than I'd ever heard it. He told me he'd figured out what had really happened at Thanksgiving. He'd done the math on when their financial problems started and when I'd stopped helping. He said he didn't blame me for cutting them off after how they'd treated me. He also said something that surprised me. He thanked me. He explained that being forced to stand on his own had been the wake-up call he'd needed. He was proud of the progress he'd made and felt more confident than he had in years. He asked if I'd be willing to visit sometime, not as their financial savior, but just as his brother. I told him I'd think about it. A year later, I did visit. The house was smaller but well-maintained. The furniture was older but clean. My family seemed happier, more relaxed, more genuine. There was no underlying tension about money, no unspoken expectations, no resentment. My brother had indeed gone back to school and was studying business management. My aunt had her own apartment and a steady boyfriend. My parents were managing their finances responsibly and seemed proud of their independence. During dinner, a modest but delicious meal they prepared themselves. My brother brought up that Thanksgiving again. He said he'd learned that family wasn't about who provided for whom, but about who showed up for each other when it mattered. He said he was sorry it had taken him so long to understand that. I accepted his apology, and for the first time in years, it felt like we were actually family again. The revenge I'd planned had been simple: let them face the consequences of their choices. But the outcome had been more complex than I'd expected. By removing myself as their financial crutch, I'd forced them to grow. By prioritizing my own well-being, I'd inadvertently taught them to do the same. Sometimes the best thing you can do for people you love is to stop enabling them to take advantage of that love. As I drove home that evening, I realized that the person who'd benefited most from my decision wasn't me, it was them. They'd discovered they were capable of more than they'd ever imagined, and I'd rediscovered what it meant to be part of a family that valued each other for more than just financial contributions. The power had gone out that Thanksgiving night, but in the darkness, we'd all finally learned to see clearly.